At the end of the month, it's a good idea to create a trial balance. The trial balance is created simply to check if you've made entries incorrectly, specifically in the double entry system. Remember that there's meant to be a debit for every credit, and ideally this is what you would do. If you're working electronically, your computer will make sure that you can't do a debit without a credit. But if you're working manually, it's much easier to make this mistake. What we do for a trial balance is simply list all of the general ledger accounts with their given balances or totals that you've just worked out in debit and credit columns. You then add both columns. Add the debit column to see what your debit total is, add the credit column to see what the credit column is, and obviously the two should be equal. If they're not equal, it means there is definitely a mistake, there's a problem. You then want to go back and try and find out what the mistake is. A handy trick is, for example, look at what the difference is and maybe go and look for an amount of that. Or sometimes even realize that if you put a debit in a credit instead, then the amount would be doubled. So halve the difference and go and look for that amount. There are different ways of trying to find it out, but the important thing is you want to find out what is the problem and then go and fix it. Keep in mind, however, that there are also mistakes that you can make that a trial balance won't pick up. For example, if you bought stationery and you recorded it as repairs instead, both of these entries would be a debit entry, and therefore you're not going to find that in your trial balance, because your trial balance will only pick up if your debits and credits are not equal. So if we have a look at example 9.10, going back to exactly the same exercise we've been following all the way through, all we're going to do is put our closing balances from the general ledger into a trial balance that's going to look like this. We have a little heading, trial balance of Sarah's Salon with the date, and then we show the sections in the general ledger. We generally separate these so that it's easier to prepare your financial statements later on. And you're going to show what is the name of the account, your folio reference. As always, we want to use folio references to see where we got the information from, and then the balance in the account as a debit or credit. In the case of Capital, you can see that the balance brought down on the 1st of July was 80,000 on the credit side. And so therefore you're going to show, it should be the 31st of July, you're going to show 80,000 on the credit side, just like that. Land and buildings and bank are both assets. You would expect them both to have debit balances, and thank goodness they do. Land and buildings has 100,000. Now look for bank. Remember that over here you had to work out what was the balance brought down by adding the debit column, putting the total on both sides, filling in that 14,600 as a missing figure, and then bringing it down to August the 1st. That balance brought down on the debit side, the one below the total, is the amount that you need to use. Do make sure that you understand how to do this, otherwise you might get confused and use the wrong figures. You only want to use what's left over. So you don't look at the total, you look at the balance that was brought down, ready to start August the 1st. So that's why my bank figure is going to be the 14,600. Current income and rent income are both incomes increasing equity, so therefore they have got credit subtotals. Remember, these are the totals where we just added the credit side together to get a subtotal. We're going to put the 49,800 in for current income and the 6,000 in for rent income. Material costs, stationery and wages are all expenses, and in exactly the same way you're just going to take your subtotals, or for wages we only had that amount that was there was no subtotal needed, and we will pop all of those into the debit column. Once you've entered all the totals in from the general ledger, you can then total the debit column to get a total of 135,800, and you add all the figures together in the credit column and you'll see that the amount should be exactly the same. The fact that we've got two amounts that are equal means there shouldn't be any mistakes and we can finish the month happy. You can now go and do the rest of the exercises to finish this chapter. Well done.